teaching in the Near East used to convey spiritual truth through a series of earthly comparison stories that teach a spiritual truth without naming names or mentioning specific deeds by specific people. So they're in a ballpark, it's little short stories that has a spiritual meaning to it.
Yep.
And we find ourselves in Matthew chapter 13, verse 24, and Jesus had come out of the house and sat by the seaside, and people started gathering around, and he started teaching, and the multitude got so big that he put himself on a ship and to teach the people. So he started teaching these. He started teaching through these parables, and here we find the second. The first one was the sower, but our lesson is going to the second parable, and then we're starting at verse 24. It says, "Another parable put he forth unto them, saying, The kingdom of heaven likened unto a man which soweth good seed in his field. But while men slept, his enemy came and sowed tares among the wheat, and went in his way." Now, as we're starting this parable, the man is referring to himself. And when he soweth good seed, that good seed is us. In his field is meaning the world. So he's teaching people these stories that they would see who he was, and through a new doctrine, and that he was going to spread his seed, which is the people, through the world. But while men slept, the enemy, the devil, came by and sowed tares among the wheat and went out on his way. But when the blades were sprung up and brought forth fruit, then appeared the tares also. Tares, or some they call them darnels, was false converts, was a weed that resembled wheat but did not come to fruitation. So here you have something that's growing in your garden. You plant wheat, it looks like wheat, probably smells like wheat, but it's not wheat. Why? Because it does not bring forth fruit.
Man, oh
Come on,
man.
Toby.
We have that in our churches. We have that in our world as far as church organizations. They look like churches, and we have people that look like Christians, say they're Christians, but they're far from them.
Come on, Toby.
That's right.
They don't bring forth fruit. But you got to put in mind that gardener, which is God, even though there's tares in the church, what's he do? He still lets the sun shine on them.
Come on, buddy.
He still hoes the garden around them.
You're water.
He still waters them and lets them grow just the same as it is the wheat.
Hey.
So when we hear that verse, it rains on the just and the unjust alike, so are Jesus as we have in our church.
You're right.
We might have tares in our church, and I'm not saying this church, but we might have tares in a church,
Right.
but they're getting fed, they're getting watered, and the sun's shining on them.
You're
And it'll
right.
be up to them whether they say
Right.
yay or nay.
That's
You're
right.
right.
Take root.
He says, "So the servants of the householder came and said unto him, Sir, didst not thou sow good seed in thy field? From whence then hath it tares? He said unto them, An enemy hath done this. The servant said unto him, Wilt thou then that we go and gather them up? But he said, Nay, lest while ye gather up the tares, ye root up also the wheat with him." So if you have a congregation and you have a tare and you try to root it up, and you have young Christians that's trying to grow and see how to be a Christian, and then you're sitting there tearing somebody down, and in their eyes they might thought that was most religious person around, and you're tearing them down, you're uprooting them,
You're right, Toby.
and then you might lose one of your real fruit. You might use the wheat it's actually a wheat, which is one of us. You might tear somebody else down.
Amen.
By trying to get rid of the bad. It says, let both grow together until the harvest. And in the time of harvest I will say to the reapers, gather ye together first the tares, and bind them in the bundles to burn them, but gather the wheat into my barn. Now, as we are talking here, we let God be the judge.
Right.
And He'll separate the good and the bad.
That's right.
He said, you bundle the tares up, you cast them into the fire. Then, as we may look, and I know I'm not going to be specific on church organizations or how they do, whether we may say they're right or they're wrong. But in the end, God will judge whether they be. But I know one thing, if you don't believe in Jesus, if you don't believe that He is the way, the truth, and the life, and that through Him there is no other way, because He said, I am the way, and there is no other way. You believe in the death, burial, and resurrection, then you're in the right place.
That's right.
But anything except for that is not of Him, and you will not enter heaven.
Amen.
It's that simple.
Yep.
Man will make it complicated. That's where the devil plants the tares.
Yep.
These tares are set forth to cause confusion, to break the unity, so that bad things can happen. When man makes it complicated, it's a tear. It's something separating yourself from God. God said He will not separate Himself from us. It'll be because of us, not because of Him. And in the end, there will be a judgment. And He'll take those tares and they will be cast into the lake of fire. And the other one will be in His barn, which is in heaven. We go to the next parable. It says, another parable put He forth unto them, saying, the kingdom of heaven is like to a grain of mustard seed, which a man took and sowed in his field, which indeed is the least of all the seeds, but when it is grown, it is the greatest among herb, and becometh a tree, so that the birds of the air come and lodge in the branches thereof. So if anybody knows mustard seeds, they are very, very, very tiny. I mean, millimeter. But that one seed, when you plant it, a mustard seed will grow 9 foot tall. Now you take the ratio of size of seed to size of plant, that's a big plant for such a small herb. Because that's what mustard seed is. We know, you look at the herb family, this herb grows into more what many consider a tree.
Yep. Yeah.
And he said that's how, and he was trying to describe how the church was just now starting. It's starting as a mustard seed, but it's going to bloom and it's going to turn into a tree. And if you know mustard seed, when the seeds drop to the ground, it fertilizes and it spreads. And it germinates very quick. A mustard seed grows very quick. Now, he says, and it says that the birds of the air come and lodge in the branches thereof. Now there's several different, if you want to look at prophecy, or like the Old Testaments, the birds represented in Daniel's interpretation with the king, those birds represent nations. So if you look at in that sense, each one of those birds, you have that mustard seed blooms into a tree, which is called, which is the religious, Christian religion, and it will house every nation.
That's right.
That comes in that tree. It'll affect the whole world.
You're right.
It's nestled on that tree. Gentile, and some scholars say that it's Gentiles seeking refuge with the Jews. So he was trying to speak in a parable that the Gentiles would have, they would find their way to being part of that tree. And then some could say it's false teachers invading the church. So it has several, depends on how you look at it. That's one thing about parables when you look at it, but I like to look at it that something so small could come back and be planted so big that it could house a tree. Because that's what it said. The Bible says that the birds of the air come and lodge.
Live there.
In the branches thereof. That the weight of that herb, because we want to call it a tree, but it's an herb. That the weight of that herb can hold a bird and house it and take care of it. It finds shelter there.
Bird calls it home.
Yeah.
Amen.
That's what we do. That's what he is to us.
You're right, Toby.
He's just now starting this church. And that's why he spoke in parables, because he told his disciples, I tell you, but he said, I can't. He said, they asked him, why are you speaking in parables? He said, because they can't handle the truth. I have to speak like this. And then we have a third parable. Another parable spake he unto them, the kingdom of heaven is like unto leaven, which a woman took and hid in 3 measures of meal till the whole was leavened. When these parables was told, Matthew and Mark, it's been told like 2 or 3 times, and they followed the same. They kept them together. So when they told these parables again in the Bible, they kept them. They didn't separate them. And one thing that when I was trying to study this is that one was an outward and one was an inward. Mm-hmm. So when you plant a seed and it grows, you see it as an outward, but you don't see with the rising of the bread. You put the leaven in the bread, and overnight that dough rises. So what's happened? It's an internal change, and it happens overnight. The tree is an outward growth. The bread is an inward growth. So these 2 parables at the same time, you're looking at 2 growths at 2 different ways. But what makes them, when Jesus was teaching, he was teaching to a multitude. Now I can tell you a story to a man to another man, and you'll get it. I can tell that same story to a woman, and she might not have the terminology or the experience to know what I'm talking about. If I'm talking about, say, cars, or referring in that sense. So Jesus had something that to a man would make sense to him, with the herb and tilling of the ground. So he told the story of the bread.
Yep, something for everybody.
Because a woman, that time, a woman stayed at the house. She cooked and she provided for her family, while the men, in that time, a woman didn't have any rights anyway. Yeah. They couldn't vote. This was a whole different age. But when he taught this lesson, and when he was teaching to the multitude, he gave something to the women to let them understand what I'm trying to tell you. That when you made that bread, and you put that leaven in that bread, and that dough rise, something changed. It multiplied. It grew within itself. Now, to a man, he comes in, he eats the bread. He don't see the dough rising. He didn't understand the concept, but by God, she did. So she was getting that same lesson as, say, a man with the mustard seed would get. And then I'm not saying, I'm not being biased with women and men. But
Toby,
I'm
it's not to interrupt, but it's amazing that there were even women in that crowd because it wasn't common for rabbis to teach women. They were not allowed to sit under religious teaching. So Jesus had a mixed crowd. That was scandalous already.
Yeah, because I mean, he was sitting by the seaside. The Bible tells us that he came out of the house and sat by the seaside. But somehow people knew who he was.
Yeah.
So one gathered, two, and then before he launched, the multitude was so great he had to get in the boat. He was pressing him over, back, and back. Before you know it, he's standing in the water. I'm getting in the boat. So that way I can look over.
Yep.
And the passersby, I mean, and you can go on vacation or walk down the streets of Charleston. You see a little crowd, what are you going to do? You're going to stop, and you're going to ponder, and you're going to look, because we're all nosy. You can't go by a little traffic accident without something. Causing another one.
Yeah, he had something compelling, didn't he?
But
Yeah.
But for a closing, all the parables had a common core, and it was large growth with small beginnings. And that's how he works.
Amen.
Large growth, small beginning.
Amen.
When we gave our hearts to him, it was a small step of faith. That when we stepped out, that was a small step. But it was a large growth that was taking place. It was like the people, when we stepped and was walking out, that was an outward appearance.
Yep.
That was us as a mustard seed stepping out and growing. But at the same time, we were that leavened bread. That's something that was inside. He was putting leaven inside of us to make us swell up from the inside out. You have two sets of growths. On the outside and on the inside, he changes you from within and without. And no man or nothing can do that. You can't give me money. You can't give me worldly things that can change me from the inside and the outside. You can put a suit on me. You can prance me around and clean me up. I can go to Charleston and pick out any bum and make him pretty on the outside. But that ain't going to change him on the inside, because you let him go and he'll sell those clothes, and he'll be back to the bum he was within 4 weeks probably.
Yep.
Because why? Because he didn't change the inside man.
Good job.
But God can change you with the inside and the outside. We don't want to sit in here and pretend that we're Christians all of our lives and be a tare and not be fruitful.
That's right.
We want to step out and we got to start bearing fruit.
Yes.
And be that wheat. We can look like it, smell like it, and God will take care of us and till us and take care of us. But until we start bearing that fruit, we're just a tare. We're not the wheat. And that's my lesson today.
Bless you, Toby. Thank you.